Now, back to Access Tech Live, the latest in tech and accessibility with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Access Tech Live. I'm Stephen Scott. Marc Aflalo is with me today. Now, earlier we mentioned a story of a student called Ramirez. He turned to ChatGPT to help him through his computer science education. Now, we were so intrigued by this story that we thought we have to find out more. So we caught up with him this week.
I'm a student at Northern Arizona University, and I specifically study computer science. Unfortunately, a lot of the classes I have to take are taught by very visual professors. And for whatever reason, our computer science department isn't the most accommodating. So it's led to a lot of accessibility barriers for me, some of which are my disability resources office is able to handle, but a lot of it is just there's too much going on that the disability resource office doesn't have the resources to really follow up on. Like, they don't understand the material I'm learning, for example. And so it got to the point where I was repeatedly dropping my classes and re-enrolling in my classes every single semester in the hopes that, hey, maybe this time it'll work out. And it didn't really work out. I was considering dropping out, but I couldn't because I had too much debt. So it wasn't really an option. And then ChatGPT happened to come out late November, and I picked it up and I started playing around with it. And I immediately realized that, whoa, this is an amazing learning tool. Like, a lot of the stuff I've been trying to learn in my classes, it was able to explain to me in about 30 seconds. Was it accurate? Maybe not, but it gave me the frame of reference I needed to then use the internet to find other resources that might be more accurate. You know, it gave me the keywords I needed to learn the rest of what I needed to learn. It just continued from there. You know, once GPT-4 came out in March, it was even more helpful, and I had to fact check it significantly less often. And it was just like a really awesome tutor. And it didn't judge me, you know, it didn't make me feel uncomfortable. I truly don't believe another human could have helped me get out of this little rut, because I was constantly thinking, like, are they judging me? Do they not think I can do this? Even if they were blind people, because there's plenty of blind software developers out there. The fact that it was a computer, it was an AI, it wasn't a real person, that kind of broke my little mental barriers, and it was able to teach me a lot of stuff. And I've been doing great since then. I haven't looked back.
That is Ramirez. I mean, I asked him afterwards in that conversation. I said, because he said something really cool, Stephen, which was, it didn't judge him, right? It didn't worry, it wasn't like his friends. I asked him if his peers knew that he uses it, and they said, yeah, everybody knows that he's using it. He doesn't hide it at all. Let's bring David Lepofsky back on, the chair of the AOD Alliance. David, if ChatGPT and services like AI like this were available when you were coming up in your education, do you think it would have helped you, or do you think it would have been the opposite?
Well, you know what? On the one hand, there's no question this kind of stuff can always help. We can always find ways that it might assist. And of course, I went to law school and we had to read things called books. And I had to get all my books recorded on audio tape, and I typed my exams on this thing that people may have heard of called a typewriter. On my first law exam, my very first law exam in my first course in my first year of law school, the ribbon broke partway through the exam. I was writing blank paper for answers. So yeah, there could have been lots of different things. But on the other hand, what infuriates me about what he was just saying are two things. I mean, I'm delighted the technology helped, but there were two things that infuriated me. The first is that he had to find his own supports. In the United States, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that should not be required. And the second thing that absolutely infuriates me as much or even more is, of all subjects for him to encounter this in, for him to face it in computer science. Computer science is such a new and growing area. We need people who are trained in computer science to be required as part of their courses to include or to learn accessible human-computer interface. It's not a required subject. The same way that you could graduate as an architect here in Ontario without ever learning how to design an accessible building, you could graduate with a computer science degree, learning how to write software and apps and so on, without knowing how to design an accessible human-computer interface, app, firmware, software, hardware. It's outrageous and it's inexcusable.
He did tell me though when that he did have pretty good support when it came to, you know, in class in terms of the Americans with Disability Act, but unfortunately they weren't up to speed as much as he was with some of the tools that were out there, which is what led him down that road. I did ask him that question.
Right, but the profs teaching the course, they should be on their agenda because they should be, as part of what they teach, they should be teaching people. It should be part of their DNA. The computer science has to include accessibility in the products they produce.
But there's something else in all of this, David, in what he says in Aaron's story, which I think resonates with a lot of us blind people out here, and disabled people more generally, I would say, is that we do often find our own ways. We have to find our own ways. We sometimes have to look at technology and see how it can benefit us, where some people might look at something new and say, hey, that's really gimmicky that I can, you know, change my text message to be more emotional or more happy or more sad, or, you know, change tone. That can really make a difference for certain people with certain difficulties, certain disabilities, right?
Absolutely. Well, settled principles that two people with an identical disability may use completely different approaches to address the same accessibility barrier. Some blind people use Braille, some don't know any Braille. Both can succeed and succeed really effectively. Some will use DOS, some will use iOS. God, I'm dating myself. Some will use iOS, some will use Android, you know, and they'll still make phone calls and do texting and all that other stuff. So the fact that he has shown incredible ingenuity to get around these things, I mean, that's unfortunately part of success living with a disability too often in our society, even though the barriers, the tools for us to overcome barriers in 2024 are radically better than the ones that were available for us, say, 40, 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago.
So I want to ask you one question, David, which I know a lot of people ask this question, you know, are you positive or are you negative about AI? But I want to ask you from a disability perspective, because ultimately, well, that's what we're about here at Access Tech Live, but it's also, I think, important to understand that perspective. So what is your take on this, AI from a disability perspective?
Well, as with so much, it has enormous potential to improve our lives, as we're already seeing from some apps like Seeing AI and the others. Heck, I'm using an off-the-shelf USB camera that's got AI built in, so I could do a hand gesture, it zooms in on me and tracks me. Because I'm totally blind and I won't know if I've moved off camera. That's AI. So there's lots of those examples, but it's also a serious threat. As the example I gave before the break, of AI that screens resumes, that perpetuates patterns of inequality and unequal opportunity in the workplace. What does that mean? As with everything else we face as people with disabilities, we've got to make sure through advocacy, proactively, to get inclusion, accessibility, and equal rights for people with disabilities embedded in our law and practically enforced. And that's something I spend a lot of volunteer time on, and lots of other people do. And you folks do a fantastic job of focusing on this and your other programs.
Well, we try, David, and unfortunately, just like all our other shows, time goes by so quickly that we have to say goodbye this week. But if people want to follow you, where should they go?
Either at David Lepofsky, Lepofsky on Twitter. I don't use that that new name. Or go to our website, aodaalliance.org. There's a sign-up link, and just paste in your email. You'll get our updates.
David, it has been wonderful to talk to you on the show. I know you're going to come back on with me and Sean over on Double Tap soon, so we can geek out a bit more and talk about all of this and have more time with you, which I'm so pleased about. But for now, David Lepofsky, thank you so much for being with us here on Access Tech Live today.
Thanks for including me.
Coming up, we caught up with two amazing people after the live cameras stopped rolling at CES. When we return, we'll introduce you to Teach Access and how companies like Verizon Wireless benefit from everything they do. This is Access Tech Live.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.